Well, first of all, I want to say that I'm very happy to be here. This is a really, really interesting workshop, and so thank you for the invitation. And today I'm going to speak about a gift that I got from an interviewee when I was conducting my PhD about life stories of Spanish Moroccan Jews in Israel. One of my interviewees appeared with a box full of notebooks, and she said, "I'm sure you will know what to do with this." And we started going through them, and I promised her that once I got my PhD done, I would figure out what to do with it. And this is the first time that I'm presenting this material, and it's only like a small glimpse into the vast world that these notebooks have opened to me. So the purpose of this presentation is to discuss some of the content of these notebooks in order to understand the experience of a woman who came from Spanish Morocco to Israel in 1956 and arrived with her 3 children and her husband in Kiryat Shmona, that for those of you who don't know what it is a hole in the middle of nowhere. And it was even, I mean, in the 50s it was basically a hole. And she came from, like most Spanish Moroccan Jews, came from a middle class, upper middle class background. And she retreated to herself, and she started reconstructing who she was, and she reconstructed her the notebooks that she had in her high school in Morocco. She didn't bring those notebooks. She reconstructed the content of these notebooks. Okay, I want to make this clear now so that you won't get lost throughout the presentation. So these notebooks are a window to the subjective dimension of the process of creation of Israeli society. These ego documents present an aspect of the Moroccan Aliyah that would otherwise not be accessible, and that is alien to official history. I am not a historian, I'm a psychologist. I am a cultural psychologist, and I work on oral history. And in order to understand the distance between official history and individual stories. And so the assumption that Moroccan Jews arrived in Israel without an education was challenged by this woman in the privacy of her home, and she was challenging someone who she was not facing. She was challenging a whole society from her room in her house. And the point she wanted to prove was who she had been before she arrived in Israel. So in this sense, these notebooks are a testimony of the way in which social and political categorizations operate on an individual level. So this lady, who's wearing a silk, how do you call this? Robe. This lady is Raquel Saraga, and this little girl is her daughter Nina, who is now 75 and gave me these notebooks. This lady is, as I said, Raquel, and on the big roof of her house in Alcázar Quibir, a small city in the north of Morocco, which for between 1912 and 1956 belonged to Spain, was part of the Spanish protectorate in Morocco. That tiny girl is Nina, her daughter, who eventually became her protector and the provider and guardian of the whole family. Nina, tiny but perfectly put together and straight, and her mom, who looked at her and as if she was a precious gift someone had brought her. There is Nina with her white dress, her gold bracelet, and her linen socks, leaning on the chair with a gesture that she still has. It is a way of sitting shaped by the good manners she was taught. Today she is still tiny, and she tells stories that are always someone else's stories. That little girl, who would always behave so well, put off her life for others. She put her life at the service of others so that they could have a life, while she remained preserving the stability of the ground on which they were stepping. Nina, Rachel's daughter, is part of these notebooks. She compiled each piece of paper, even those written on a post-it, because at some point her mom started writing on napkins, on post-its, on anything, so nothing would be lost. As I said, she gave them to me so that I would do something with it, I quote. These notebooks are a treasure for her, her last connection to her beloved mother, who passed away a few years ago. Precarity, lack of control over one's life, anonymity, and disorientation before society they didn't quite manage to understand were the main threats to identity among Rachel's family and in general among immigrants from Arab and Muslim countries in Israel. Remembering a past of abundance and joy, an easy life in which at night one would dream of Eretz Israel, are ways of facing those threats. Remembering becomes a resistance against the disappearance of our past in the encounter with the hegemonic stereotypes that Moroccan Jews were basically living in caves. And this was the assumption, the hegemonic assumption, and that Moroccan Jews were always in threat. So until today, it's a historiographical trope that leaves no place for positive memories people have and turns them into a fantasy, into a fabrication or a exaggeration. These pictures are a shortened chronic of the emergence of the notebooks. We see a worn-out flag of Israel Rachel made in Morocco before their Aliyah to celebrate the establishment of the Jewish state. Emissaries of the Jewish Agency told Moroccan Jews how easy life would be in Israel. Rachel, like most Moroccan Jews in the 50s, had sent her children to the schools of the Alliance Israélite Universelle. So it was important for her that they would continue to receive the best education possible. The emissary, according to Nina's account, guaranteed that education would be provided from first grade through university. There we see Nina's father in the shack where they were given upon their arrival in Israel, in Kiryat Shmona. Nina's father got into a severe depression. Nina's mother tried to make the shack look as decent as possible. I don't know if you can tell that they were like these things that you see in every Spanish house. She put them everywhere. Okay. Nina left school and started working so her brothers and sisters could stay in the precarious schools they were attending. At some point, she decided to send them out to kibbutzim and continued helping the family. Years after their arrival, Rachel started writing. I found out about the existence of these notebooks when I was interviewing Rachel's daughter, Nina, and her cousins. I was then doing my PhD, and we spent the whole day together. We had lunch together, and since I work on autobiographical narratives, that's what I do. I spend a lot of time with very old people. And during that conversation, they kept talking about the past, and at some point, Nina brings out this box of notebooks. But I'm speaking to one of her cousins, so I don't notice it. At some point, I turn around and I see them reading one of these notebooks. So I wanted you to see how the conversation went. I said, "What are you reading?" There's 4 people here speaking, okay? It's my aunt's notebook of poems, and then the sister. Because our aunt, Nina's mom, was quite a poet. She wrote a lot. I start reading the notebook. Poetry notebook. Educational group, Spain. Spanish grammar and literature. Mr. Antonio, I don't know what. Alcázar Quibir, Spanish Morocco, Raquel Saraga. Nina continues reading. I appreciate him because he gave me a lot. When he went back to Spain, he took my notebook. And Miriam answers, my Aunt Rachel knew poems. Look, she would reconstruct everything word by word. All this she wrote by heart, things she learned at school. And I asked, so these are not her poems? No, they're poems she learned at school, but that she wanted to remember. As you see, like they are all like finishing each other's sentences because they've spoken about this so many times. I tell them, this is so beautiful. Look at what a beautiful calligraphy she had, like dad, just like him. Dad taught her a lot. She was his little sister. You know what I just thought of when my father passed away in the Shiva. The Shiva is the 7 days of mourning. Your mom stayed with us, and we all slept in the living room. And at night, she'd say poems to all of us. It was her way of, this is Nina speaking. She didn't have any friends in Israel. She was all day writing and remembering poems. From time to time, when there was a reunion, she'd always be in the middle saying her poems, no matter the age of those around her. They could be kids, old people, young people, she'd always be in the center. And I say, and those were the poems she learned at school, so I'm trying to understand. And she says, the most beautiful thing is that many times we try to capture it by filming her, but we never managed to. Why? I don't know. We never had, like we'd start and then the film would stop. It was like there was something in the atmosphere. I say, however, she did make sure to write them. She did. It was her main occupation. When she recited, she wasn't reciting it for me. She was reciting it for herself, to remember, to live again her, and Nina says, she wanted to know if she still remembered everything. And I think this is what happened to her. Sorry. Sorry. Here. She wanted to know if she still remembered everything. And I think this is what happened to her, that she could remember. Because I can't remember the poems I learned at school, because I never remembered them again. She lived in the past. She lived in her childhood, in her school. She lived off memories, because life here didn't give her anything. She left there her friends, her family, her well-being, her comfort. She left there all of her luxuries. She left her way of life, and to remember the school, the poems, or her teachers made her relive that again. The presence of Nina's notebooks in that interview was not something without importance. Nina brought them to speak about the family history, which is a way of telling her own history. But Nina, as you see, is an extremely sensitive teller and listener, and she understands people very quickly, but she never speaks about herself. So her way of telling her own story was telling her mother's story. Nina put herself at the service of her family, and her story is, in that sense, the story of those who she could sustain, contain, support, provide for, and give way to. Those notebooks were written by her mother in Israel. Some of them are a replica of the old notebooks she had when she was a child and studied at the Grupo Escolar España. Nina's mother, once they arrived in Israel, would devote her time to writing those notebooks as if those were her school notebooks, with the name of the teacher and the name of the class included. So you see here, it's in Spanish, but you will believe me if I tell you that it says notebook of poems. Grupo Escolar España is the name of the school, which means like educational group Spain. Teacher of Spanish grammar and literature, Don Antonio Mira. Alcázar Quibir, this city. Marruecos Español, Spanish Morocco. Raquel Saraga. Raquel Saraga was her maiden name. I appreciate him because he gave me a lot. When he went back to Spain, he took his notebook. He took my notebook with him. So there are different stratum on this of this story only on this first page that explain the encounter between the intimate and the historical. The name of the school, Grupo Escolar España, was part of a network of schools established by the Spanish Colonial Project, which had a special section for the Hebrew, quote-unquote, population, because of course Jew is a bad word, So then you would call them Hebrews, because it was nicer. Which eventually was incorporated into the Spanish general system, meaning, at first, they were called Escuelas Hispano-Hebreas, Spanish Hebrew schools, and at some point, so you had Spanish and Hebrew schools together, but also separate ones, but then there were also those that merged. And there were no few Jews that were studying in Spanish Catholic institutions.
But they were called Escuela Hebrea Española.
Española Hebrea. No, Hispano-Hebrea. That I never knew why Hispano-Hebrea, not Español, but never mind. So education was one of the resources by which Spain managed to gain Jewish Sephardi identification with the country. One of the priorities of the colonial project. We have tons of historical documentation about how managing. There was a whole movement called Philosephardism, that was based on reclaiming the Sephardi Hispanism as part of Spanish colonial project, as part of Spain's expansion on the Mediterranean. So the Sephardic Jews were reclaimed as citizens of Spain, as more Spanish than the king, because there's nothing more Spanish than a Sephardic Jew. What can be more Spanish than that? Yes, I mean someone that left the Iberian Peninsula, you know. So this was the rhetoric. Of course, there was a pragmatic motivation behind this. It was not like this sudden love for Jews. It was a pragmatic motivation behind it. Anyways. This identity, So, the Spanish colonial project turned the Jew into a semi-Spaniard, as a mix between, this was the Grupo Escolar España. Nice. These are two really funny pictures. All these kids are Jews. And I brought them as a proof of this practices that Jews engaged into in Spanish Morocco that were part of a politics of identity that Spain was promoting. So Spanish Moroccan Jews would go to dancing classes, like I myself did, not because my family is Moroccan, which they are, but because I grew up in Spain. And so this is what every Spanish kid has a picture exactly like this. So the same experience for Spanish Moroccan Jews. So the Spanish colonial project in Morocco turned the Jews into semi-Spaniards, as a mix between a Jew and a Spaniard. This identity was promoted by the Delegation of Indigenous Affairs and played a huge role, as I just said, by Philosephardism, as a movement of reclaiming Sephardi Jews as Iberian and Spanish subjects. Let's make a short detour to see these two canonical examples of the Philo-Sephardic discourse, because it's just amazing. These are just Moroccan Jewish kids in the 50s. By the way, very different from the way they are portrayed in Israel. So, this is 100% Philosephardism. May Spaniards, this was written by Ortega, a very famous influencer on Spain political thought, and he was the Philo-Sephardi along with Ángel Pulido, but he spoke in a more direct language, let's say. May Spaniards not forget that the future of Spain comes down to Morocco, from the days in which a clairvoyant Queen Isabel the Catholic entrusted us in her admirable testament the duty of not seizing the conquest of Africa. At the other side of the Gibraltar Strait, thousands of Spaniards, Sephardic Jews, that same queen casted there, maybe so that they would be the seed from which the tree would grow, are waiting for us with open arms and hearts, filled with joy, with love for Spain, to help the nation in his civilizing conquest.
Yeah, right.
But it's referring to the expulsion.
Yes, 5 minutes.
Of course.
All right, so the need to preserve the image of the Catholic monarchs while reaching out to Sephardic Jews take here one of its most outlandish forms. Ortega suggests that Sephardic Jews in northern Morocco are some sort of advanced scout sent by Elizabeth the Catholic, who, just like an oracle, would have made an extraordinary act of historical foresight by having the Jews settle on a land that would become the future conquest of Spain. The reasons behind this philo-Sephardic movement were obviously pragmatic, mainly facilitating the penetration to Morocco through establishing commercial networks and undermining the local political structures. Anyways, Rachel writes the name of the teacher, as we saw before, here. Antonio Mira, clearly Spanish name, from where we can assume that he was among the emissaries of Spain to teach the Spanish and the Hebrew population in the Spanish territory of Morocco. Finally, she writes her maiden name. Now, I want to show some examples of the content of other notebooks. Rachel wrote everything she knew and remembered, and also scattered thoughts. Some of the notebooks have poems she learned at school, pages and pages of poems, also recipes, all of them Spanish food, jokes, sayings. Others have memories of her childhood and youth in Alcazar, the loving home she grew up in, and the shock of coming into her husband's family, a little more problematic than hers. Also, there are countless references to the importance of knowledge. For example, let's take this page, a small sample of the numerous pages she devotes to this question, to the question of knowing things and telling to a reader we don't know who he is, that she knows things. Knowledge is a must. The Chinese say that he who does not smile should not open the store. This is true. He who does not forget, these are like scattered, he who does not forget the past does not live in the present. To remember the past and to fix the present. To learn to think and to be able to fix problems. Childhood is the best age for knowledge. Intelligence is a power, but it doesn't have strength. One needs to assist its maintenance. It is never late for learning. We can't forget history. We can't forget history to create a future. We need to see life and enjoy it. There are full reconstructions also. Besides this, the notebooks have full reconstructions of history lessons and literature lessons, like full reconstructions of lessons. These notebooks were a way of reconstructing the proofs of who she had been, the education she had received, the culture she came from. It was also a way of reliving that education, remembering the material of her memories. She treasured in those notebooks the traces that she lost, but the traces of the life she lost, but that were still in her. This was not only a remembering practice, but a practice of identification, through which she continued to be who she was, despite everything. The very practice of organizing all those memories that connected her to tradition and a time that specified her, this practice also transformed her by adding moral value to her life, since she had the courage to resist and remember. The value of remembering is a constant topic throughout the notebooks. Rachel started reconstructing her memories years after she arrived in Israel, the country she loved so much. Faced with the impossibility of integrating in the country, of finding a life that would be worth it, she retreated to her memories, and that is how she presented herself to others. That is why in celebrations, she would recite those poems to whoever was there to listen. Those poems served the purpose of dignifying life and reminding herself who she was. Thank you.